And they would get upset if the hospital say, well, you know, we are a stage ahead of that. So because people felt it was coming to Barbados and it was coming from North America or Europe or wherever. And so what was done, and I remember looking at the documentation, a protocol was set up in terms of giving gifts, of identifying what was priority for the hospital, and so on. They went and they changed the whole system. We had a board and we had a CEO, and somebody had the, not somebody, you had the prime minister as head of government, and I presume she took it to cabinet to merge the CEO and the chair of the board. So we end up with the executive director. What they had to do, they had to go back. I gotta be speaking in Beijing and Glenn. They had to go back and go back to the original situation and separate the two things. We have had a lot of discussion about the flight of nurses, because there's a global shortage of nurses, and we know that. We also have tried bringing nurses. I remember in the past we would have nurses from Nigeria several years ago. We've had nurses from the Philippines. In more recent times, we've had nurses from Ghana. We know that some of them come and in fact, I understand that a lot of them can't work at the hospital. That, you know, and I would have to research that so to make sure before I speak more on it. But little is known about the loss of doctors. We have lost a number of major consultants. I mentioned ICARE and so on. I am very familiar with people who need to see a rheumatologist. My sister, God rest her in her grave, was the first case of lupus I knew of in Barbados. And she lived with lupus for 42 years or so and was a dialysis patient for 15 years. I don't think she would mind me talking about her in having left. She's probably looking at me and smiling, very quiet. She was not like me. She was very quiet. But the point I'm making is that, and I mentioned hematology and so on. At the QEH, most of the lupus patients would have been seen by a rheumatologist, because and persons, of course, suffering from arthritis in its various forms. But a critical thing in relation to lupus patients, and I hope my memory serves me right, is that once they are seen and managed well, the chances of developing kidney complications is reduced. And we know that the demand for dialysis is high, it is not cheap, and therefore it is important that we prevent this. I ask, as we talk about bringing people and so on, I ask the question, what is the situation in terms of the ongoing care of those patients? And the implications of them not getting the kind of care to which they're accustomed. So I have raised those very concrete examples because I'm conscious of the time, and I heard you mention that your next guest was probably there for a while now. The important thing to recognize is that when we look at our healthcare system, and I focus on the QEH, but we can also talk about the polyclinics and so on. And we can also talk about mental health, because I'm talking about the QEH. Are we in a position right now to cater adequately, efficiently, and effectively to the patients that we have on ground? And how are we preparing for those patients? Because Glenn mentioned things like national insurance and so on. I don't have time to touch labor, but I can come back. Glenn raised an important point. I think you did too, Ferdinand. Are people employees or are they self-employed when they come? Will they be paying national insurance?
Correct.
Employee? Who will be monitoring those things? Because we have heard over and over again, and government has also been doing this, that people are less and less being recruited under a contract of service and are contracted to provide services, meaning they are relating to an organization as a self-employed person. And I would like the National Insurance Department to tell us and do you do the inspections that you did? Do you go on the construction sites? Do you go to hotels? Do you go to various small and medium-sized businesses to find out if these people are being paid as they're supposed to be and exactly under what conditions? So I really think that when we start to talk about free movement, and as Cami says, unmanaged migration also destroys the social and cultural fabric of countries. Now we need to manage this. I'm not anti anything, because when people talk about doing things in a structured way, people seem to get upset when they have their personal preferences. Or
Different gripes and so on with Branford Tate when he was Minister of Health to do with the St. Joseph Hospital in St. Peter. I think you may recall that. There was discussion about having a second hospital up in the north of the country. Whatever became of that, of those ideas and those proposals?
I mean, even if there wasn't consultation, people got information shared. I mean, GIS, for example, would run stories on things to come, planned initiatives and all kinds of things. But I just find it.
GIS is no longer the GIS of
but that is true. They're not allowed to function as they did. In fact, I heard, and I something I have to research, because last week or week before, because it is Sunday, which is a new week, I heard Minister Sandra Husbands make reference to some new, is it a new university college or something? Now, I know that there was a plan to introduce a university college of Barbados. I remember distinctly, because I remember going to the Ministry of Education as somebody who would have been involved in education, and in fact, who would have been involved in a consultancy with a former colleague of mine from UE when they were contemplating a merger of Barbados Community College, the Samuel Jackman Prescott Polytechnic, as it was called back then, and Erdiston. And part of the exercise was to do some reviews of these three institutions. And when the colleague who asked me to work with him on the assignment back then, my question was, what problem are you seeking to solve? Because I couldn't understand the rationale of pulling them together. Was it to get some kind of administrative efficiency? Because if you're talking about a university college, you're talking about a different kind of student. Erdiston was a very specific kind of educational and training institution. And so it wasn't making sense. And then I said, but if you're looking to change your enrollment, why aren't you expanding SJPP as it was then, for example? And so, I heard this announcement and reference was made to either August or September or something. And I just heard part of the news item. I said, but I haven't heard that discussed in any detail anywhere. And the reason why I say that is that on the one hand, you have all of these consultative sessions, right, Glenn?
Right.
Take place. But critical information like what you were discussing this evening, and if I heard correctly, the introduction of a new initiative that would be of significant interest and so on, I've not heard about it. Not in terms of providing information to the public or seeking to get feedback and input. So I'm very concerned.
Yeah. I
did, and I had planned to mention that because I am yet to understand the logic of it. Now, the first question I would ask, I don't know if either of you had been down there or had any clue as to what down there looked like.
Not since COVID, no.
I remember having a relative down there it was just after the peak of COVID. But the hospital was using that still state-of-the-art equipment. My question is, and I know how people phrase comments. Yes, it fell under the QEH, and they said the QEH. I'm trying to find the exact word. You might be able to find the word of the article. When they said the QEH would have removed, and this is my word, remove the equipment. My question is, to where? Under what conditions? What will that equipment, was it something that can be taken and put into immediate use at the hospital or any of the hospital, geriatric or other, the polyclinics or something? Or are we going to have that equipment, some of it very expensive, stored in conditions that are not conducive to maintenance or maintaining them in a way that they can quickly be put back into use? Put it negatively, will that equipment end up being damaged because of poor storage? How much, and this is it, how much did it cost to set it up? I remember somebody suggested that they might have gotten money from some interesting persons. So it'd be interesting to know how it was financed. What is the value? What is the current value of that equipment? What is the expected life of that equipment in under normal circumstances? What is likely to happen to it? How much money is the government making from the rental? Who authorized the rental of that facility? And when they say that it's going to be used for accommodations, what retrofitting or whatever will they have to do to make it residential? And if you had to flip it back to something close to what it was or is, I don't know what it is now, what's all that going to entail? What's the cost of all of that?
Guys, I just saw the article you posted to us, Maxine, of the government engaged in $120 million additional dollars to upgrade.
Yes.
To upgrade the facility at Harrison's Point. Am I correct?
Yes, and I'm here. I sent that to you. I sent it to Dave. I'm also looking at another article here.
I was just looking to see how I can. Dave,
I sent it to Dave as well. I sent it to Dave as well.
Okay,
and
let me see.
This is another one. If you can get it pulled up while you're looking at that, and an article, April the 3rd, 2021, QEH newsletter, The Pulse. An article by Dr. Ford talked about Harrison Point. Okay, there you have it. Now,
right. Okay.
This is a loan. My recollection from that article is a loan that there was a 5-year moratorium. If I scroll down, and we might probably get to see that, a 5-year moratorium. All right, hold a minute there. It says, Brussels, less than a year into its operation, the island's main coronavirus hospital at Harrison's Point, St. Lucie, is set for an upgrade, Prime Minister Mia Mottley revealed Thursday. Government has secured $120 million loan. Now, I like people to tell me if the loan is Barbados dollars or US dollars or whatever. Now, I presume.
Well, I think this is Barbados because in another area it says 60 million US.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
So that is it. From the European Investment Bank, the European Union-owned institution to help improve the facility's care of COVID-19 patients, she told journalists. Now, that is an additional 120. So my question is, what was the original expenditure? How much was spent? Martin said, yes, you see that place called Harrison's Point, we are about to get a loan from the European Investment Bank. Oh yeah, for US, $60 million, some of which would be retroactively applied to the money spent. Let me read this again. This is interesting. Some of which we are about to get a loan from the European Investment Bank for $60 million US. Some of which would be retroactively applied to the money spent to convert Harrison Point. I just missed that part. But in other words, you're telling me that retroactively applied to the money spent to convert Harrison's Point last February. So you are paying back yourself for the money spent. It probably says, well, it still leads me to raise the question, but look at the condition of the loan. Don't move it from there. The loan has exceedingly generous terms because there's a 5-year moratorium, as I mentioned. In other words, we don't pay anything for the first 5 years. So that means that the loan was 2021. You haven't started paying back the loan yet, and you changed the purpose. We don't know how much money you're making from it, how it will help to service this loan, because this was for medical purposes. So the first 5 years you pay nothing, and the remaining 15 years you pay. But I think we're paying about. I think, is the Prime Minister speaking, right? I think we are paying about 1.25%. And anybody who knows anything, this is like the kind of rates we paid at the IMF. I remember the IMF, Glenn, which had a variable rate.
But then we floated how much millions of dollars we floated for a loan or for loans at what, 5 to 8%?
Yes, a couple hundred million.
So how are you going to come and talk about nothing compared to 10 to 13% of the last administration? Nobody wants to know about the last administration. We want to know what's going on now and what's going to go on for the next 20 years. That's what we want to know.
But the question I would ask is, tell us which loans were at 10 and 13, because you see, we get a lot of things. Now, that is an article. Since I sent that to you.
I can speak now?
Yes, condition in Barbados as it relates to these facilities. Maxine, you were dealing with this loan and the impact that this loan is supposed to have where our country's health service is concerned.
The thing about it is, my question is, having borrowed that amount of money, and then I was reading another article there referring to Dr. Corey Ford, who would have been the person in charge, saying that this was actually, it had a 200-bed capacity. And, it had, in other words, state of the art, and how there were some Europeans who figured that they could not have gotten the care there. All of that said to me that a lot of money went into equipping this facility, and they were specialized. I think it was David who mentioned people with respiratory or pulmonary issues. And I remember, as I said, I had a relative who went there after the COVID. Well, I was still in the fringes of that, but it related not to COVID per se, but to another respiratory issue the person had. So people who may have lung issues, I am sure that with all the kinds of specialists that we have here, government talks about a PPP all the time. I am sure they could have gone into some public-private partnership to maintain some state-of-the-art facility. My question is whether this arrangement is a halfway house to handing that over to Pendry or whoever else, to somebody, to take it out of that altogether. And let's say, because I think somebody in the conversation earlier mentioned the issue of tourism, a tourism-related hotel or something. Now, I know that there's construction on the West Coast going into the northern part of the country, Northwest corridor. We continue to have, and this now takes us into the realm of capacity, we continue to have ongoing problems with the water in St. Lucie and parts of St. Peter, I believe. Question to the government and to the planners and whoever in the private sector who may be part of this. How do we propose to address the water issue for those projects in the north? Because if we can't deliver, if somebody's saying 80 million in estimated equipment, now if of that 120 million plus whatever was spent before, because remember that from what the Prime Minister said, according to that article, some of the money would have covered what was spent. In other words, they spent money, then borrowed money to replace that, so that we need to find out beyond the 120 how much more was spent And of the 120, how much was applied retroactively? So another, how much was additional expenditure of that money borrowed? But the point, back to the point I'm making, and I hope that the audience is following me. We're talking about significant construction of what I believe will be upmarket tourism plant and so on. But we will getting the water from to deal with this if we cannot solve the current water woes of the population, the Bajan population, or the people resident in St. Lucie and St. Peter and wherever else we are affected by that water. You know, because I would hope that all of these things would in fact be part of a holistic plan communicated to us.
Something has to be wrong with the system.
You know, Glenn, you mentioned, when you were talking about the contracts, it took me back to the temporary prison, same location. Because I remember talking to a small Black businessman who was complaining that with a lot of the, you know, because he had fences and wire work and that
Right.
he could not understand how, and this, it was alleged, let me correct that because I think we can go back and find it, but he was alleging that that kind of work went to somebody known in Barbados for his involvement in the music industry. But because, and remember who would have been Attorney General at the time? The Prime Minister would have been in charge of Carson Point at the time with the prison. And the person was asking, how could this individual get so much work? I don't know if they ended up subcontracting, but the allegation was that this person got work because of association, not ability to do the work. In fact, what we have now last week, Thursday or so, I heard on VOB News, a gentleman, and Mr. Strickland has it correct, a gentleman representing the small contractors said they're not getting any work. And he made reference to some project where they were expecting to start work, and then they found there were 40, I think, if I remember the number correctly, 40 contracted workers from over and away, as Bajans would say. And I mean, I see it all the time. I understand, and I certainly would have been part of a cabinet where discussions were and preparations were made for workers. Negotiations were done with the Chinese authorities, for example, when they were looking to do the work in St. Philip, and we negotiated an arrangement to make sure that a significant percentage of the jobs went to Barbadians. But you see, the thing is, colleagues, for me, the big problem is that here we have an administration that boasts of communicating and coming to the people. Now, they come to the people after the fact, when they mess things up, and then come to ask for solutions and say that they are sensitive to the people's voice, and so they react rather than consult first, get it right, and do it right the first time. They do things, make a mess, then they come back, say that they're consulting or listening to the people or whatever fancy terms they want. I am very concerned about how decisions are being made, who is benefiting. And somebody raised a question, colleagues, earlier about the terms and conditions. I would have to see a loan agreement to be able to determine what the elements of that loan, because the person was asking if it would change, if it would, what are the implications for the loan? I don't know. It depends on what are the terms and conditions of the loan. And so I presume that if there was some kind of clause in there constraining government, they either would have had to go and renegotiate rather than just ignore or break the terms and conditions.